Given that I wanted to make sure my poster was advanced as possible, I tried to gain as much audience feedback throughout the production process of making my poster. This would allow me to understand how I could improve my poster, thus meaning I was able to change my poster based on what I had learnt from audience feedback. From my first attempt of the poster, I learnt that I hadn't included enough information to make it conventional for a film poster. Therefore, my audience feedback informed me that if I wanted to make my poster look more professional, I would need to include things like a tagline. As you can see from my second attempt, I added a tagline in order to make my poster look more realistic. However, my audience feedback informed me of the fact that I still needed to include more information in order to make my poster look conventional. Therefore, I learnt from my audience feedback that in order to improve the quality of my poster, I would need to look and research into what information is included on posters. Therefore, they encouraged me to add things like the starring actor's name and a billing box in order to make my media product more easily identifiable as a film poster. This therefore shows how my audience feedback was really useful, given that it gave me specific things in which I could add to my poster in order to make sure that my consumer understood what media format I was using. As you can see, I learnt from my audience feedback, given that I was able to add a billing box to my poster in order to make it more conventional and thus appeal to my target audience better. However, I also received feedback saying that I needed to make sure that all the information in the billing box was lined up neatly. Therefore, I learned from my audience feedback that in order to improve the quality of my poster and enhance the way it looked, I would need to make sure that all the information in the billing box was lined up. Therefore, I would need to go back into InDesign and Photoshop in order to use the tools within the softwares to line this information up. This would successfully enhance the quality of my poster, ensuring that it looked professional. As you can see, I successfully learnt from the audience feedback I had gathered. I took on board the fact that they said that the billing box should be lined up in a more organised manner, and therefore I spent time working in InDesign and Photoshop to line this information up. This proves how I learnt a lot from my audience feedback, given that it gave me useful and specific feedback that successfully allowed me to enhance the quality of my poster. I also learnt from my audience feedback that if I wanted to make my poster look really professional, I should use the layout tools in InDesign in order to make sure that the film title was exactly central on the film poster. This would therefore impress my consumers, given that it shows that I have spent time making sure that each and every detail of my poster was neatly organised and laid out. Therefore, I learnt from my audience feedback that if I wanted my poster to appear professional, I would need to pay attention to detail, especially when using the layout features in InDesign. As you can see, I learnt from my audience feedback, given that I was able to include the actor's name on the poster. This therefore meant that people would recognise the actor's name and thus take interest in my film. Therefore, the audience feedback that I gathered was really useful, and I learnt a lot from it, given that by including the actor's name it would help promote my film to a wider target audience, given that people would be interested in the film because of the actor. Although I had learnt a lot about the organisation and layout of my poster from my audience research and feedback, I think it is possible to say that I needed to learn more about the image. Therefore, I went out and got more audience feedback that was focused purely on the image. I learned that if I wanted to improve my image, I would need to take an image where her hands were not above her chest. This makes it too hard to edit the poster, given that her hands cover information and make it hard to position information in a way that is easy to read. Therefore, although this body language did encode the fact that my central protagonist felt vulnerable, I learnt that it was not effective in terms of positioning information, and therefore it is possible to say that from my audience feedback, I learnt that it was important to remove this image and take a new one, whereby it would be easier to place information on my poster given that our hands would not be in the way. Therefore, I learnt from this audience feedback, given that as you can see, I was able to take images where her hands were placed by her side. This meant that the information on my poster was easier to read, thus improving the quality of my poster and making it look more professional. This shows how I was able to learn from my audience feedback and retake some of my photos to ensure that my poster would be of the highest quality possible. Although this image was a massive improvement from the first image that I used, as you can see, the actor's name is hard to read because of the background. Therefore, my audience feedback informed me of the fact that I should change the colour of the background in order to make the image more conventional for the thriller genre and also easier for the audience to read. Therefore, I learnt from my audience feedback that in order to improve my poster further, I would need to go into Photoshop and start editing the image so that it conformed to the conventions of the thriller genre in a more appropriate manner, and thus meant that the information on my poster was easier to read. As you can see, I was successfully able to learn from my audience feedback and crop the image out of the background. This therefore meant I could add a fill layer in, ensuring that the actor's name was really easy to read. This shows how I learnt from my audience feedback and was able to improve my work so that the audience could decode the information on my poster. As you can see, my poster has improved drastically from the first draft. This was because I learnt a lot from audience feedback. However, one piece of audience feedback that I had now received was the fact that I needed to make the poster more conventional to the thriller genre. I needed to ensure that the image encoded information about the narrative of my film, given that posters do not give the audience that much information. Therefore, I needed to include features within the image that would help the audience to understand what the film was about. Given that I wanted to learn from the audience feedback that I had received and stretch myself and my editing skills, I wanted to think about the ways in which I could edit the image to encode meaning about the narrative of my film. Given that my film was based around a mental health illness whereby my central protagonist could not decipher between reality and illusion, I wanted to edit the image in a way where you had two versions of her face, to show that her version of reality was very different to what normal people see every day. This shows the initial stages of my editing. However, I wanted to use colours as symbolism in order to encode meaning for the audience, thus meaning that my image was more conventional to the thriller genre. As you can see, I added a red gradient map to the base image of my poster. Red symbolises death and fear, and therefore the way in which I had used red would help to encode the fact my poster was promoting a thriller film. I then wanted a cold contrast colour which contrasted to the red. However, I also wanted this colour to have underlying symbolism that would help encode meaning about the narrative of my film. I ended up using a bluey grey colour, given that this made her face look cold. This therefore showed that she wasn't very happy within her life at the moment, given that her mental illness was making it very hard to carry out her daily routine. Here you can see how I have learnt from my audience feedback, given that I was able to edit the image in a way that encoded meaning about the narrative of my film. I was also able to use colours and their symbolism in order to ensure that my image conformed to the conventions of the thriller genre in a more appropriate manner. This therefore shows how I was able to learn a lot from my audience feedback and improve my work so that it was a more professional product that encoded information about the narrative of my film whilst also informing the audience of the genre of the film that I was promoting. This shows how useful audience feedback was, given that I was able to learn a massive amount from the feedback I gained. I was able to use the feedback I gained throughout the production stage in order to tweak specific parts of my poster and thus improve the quality of my poster overall. When looking back at the first original poster I made and the final poster I have made, it is possible to say that the audience feedback contributed significantly towards improving the quality of my work. This presentation only talks about the audience feedback that I received during the production stages of my work. However, now that I have finished my work, I will evidently get audience feedback after my production. This will allow me to learn about what I could do to improve my poster even further. Although I will not be given the opportunity to improve my poster, it is useful to learn about how you can improve your work, given that if you ever come to do something like this again, then you will know exactly what features went well and what features you need to work on.